What is up, people? Welcome back to the channel. So this is episode 3 in the fat loss series, and I think this is probably going to be one of the most important ones. To date, you have gotten your calories, you've gotten your macros, you've learned how to calculate them, and that's fantastic. But the next step is, how do we actually fill up those macros? And this is a step where a lot of people fall down. It's an area where I fell down in my past. It's an area where I see my clients struggle on a week-to-week basis, and I help them improve it with some of the techniques I'm going to discuss in this video. Tracking your calories and tracking your macros is a fantastic system to allow you to see that there's no foods that are like inherently bad or inherently good that are going to help you to achieve fat loss. But there are certainly better options that we can pick, because the main thing that we do really want to stave off during a fat loss phase is hunger. We want to make this phase as seamless as possible, because time after time it is going to be hunger which causes people the most discomfort and causes them to fall off track. And the most important thing that matters when it comes to fat loss is being adherent and sticking to your calorie deficit. I'm just going to throw up on the screen a very famous pyramid. It's not necessarily the pyramids of Giza, but it is the muscle and strength pyramids formulated by Eric Helms way back when. And you can see at the base of this pyramid is behaviors and lifestyle, okay? And that is really what is going to shape the foundations of your diet and how easy it is to stick to a diet. And then you can see after that it's going to be calories, macros, micros, and then things like meal timing supplements, okay? So we want to ensure that our behavior and our lifestyle, our food selection, our calories and macros are in the best place to actually keep that base of the pyramid solid, which is going to be adherence. Let's get this straight. Your body does not want to be shredded. Your body probably doesn't want you to have a six-pack, but you want to have a six-pack, okay? And your brain has really smart regulatory systems which tries to keep you from achieving a six-pack or from getting shredded. So there are regulatory systems in place that can drive us to eat more or to eat less, because your body wants to essentially maintain a dynamic state of equilibrium, which is called homeostasis, to stop you from getting too fat or too lean. And in this case, we want to get too lean. And what we eat can drive up these regulatory systems, or it can essentially neutralize them. So when we're dieting down and we are losing body fat, we're going to start to deplete fat stores, and there is a really important hormone in our fat stores called leptin. Leptin will start to decrease as we get leaner, and leptin tells us that we are full. So we are starting to deplete this hormone that essentially tells us that we're full. And when this starts to deplete as well, there's different type of neurons that will start to activate that will drive us to be more food seeking. So we'll start to kind of pay attention more to, say, food advertising, pay more attention to the smell of food, pay attention more to the taste of food, the sight of food, even somebody suggesting food to you, and that will drive you to want to seek out more food. And then when it comes to the foods that we choose, depending on the actual makeup of that food, that can start to trigger reward systems within our brain, which can cause us to want to overeat more. Food will taste nicer as well as we do get into a diet state. Foods that we kind of want to keep an eye on within the diet are ones that are going to be high in sugar, high in salt, and high in fat. Now, typically if you have a food that is dominant in one or the other, it's probably unlikely that you'll really want to overeat a ton of it. So an example here is fruit. Fruit is very high in sugar, but you probably won't be gorging on a bag of raspberries. And then on fat. So fat again makes up this complex of sugar, salt, and fat, which is going to encapsulate what a hyperpalatable food is. However, you probably are not going to start drinking olive oil. And with salt, you're probably unlikely to start drinking salt from a shaker. However, when we have foods that have all three within them, they are very easy to overeat. So think of the likes of pizza, think of the likes of cookies, think of the likes of donuts, all the things that taste really fucking nice. These essentially are called hyperpalatable foods, and they will start to trigger this reward system. And this reward system is even heightened when we are hungry and we're dieted and we have low leptin stores, which is going to cause us to want to overeat them more. It's going to cause us to want to seek them out more, and we'll probably eat a lot more calories from these foods before we start to feel full. So then when it does come to this satiety factor, so the feeling of feeling full, that is also going to be dominated by neurons as well as different hormones and different peptides within our body that is going to tell us that, you know, it's time to stop eating. And things that really determine this is the caloric value of food as well as the actual food volume. So you can see here there's a few different things that are going to be driving the things of our hunger, driving the likes of our consumption, as well as driving the likes of our satiety. Now we can leverage our food sources to actually make this system work a little bit more in our favor to make it easier to stick to fat loss. So this is where it is really important to understand the way you eat and what you eat is really important for your body composition and the body composition that you're looking to get. I'm a massive advocate for dieting flexibly, and flexible restraint in research has been shown to be better better than rigid restraint. So rigid restraint would be saying that you could only eat certain types of foods, where flexible restraint would be allowing yourself to eat a broad spectrum of foods, but ensuring that you were essentially having a lot of them in moderation, which is where it comes to these hyperpalatable foods. Hyperpalatable foods, there's nothing wrong with them in isolation. We need to have them in moderation, however, especially if we're trying to diet and get really lean, because if we have too many within the diet, they can just cause us to overeat. When it comes to the foods that we choose, we want to ideally have the majority of our diet comprising of foods with a low energy density. Now, what the fuck is low energy density? Energy density essentially is the amount of calories in your food divided by 100 grams. So foods with a low energy density are foods that will typically have a low amount of calories per 100 grams. You think of the likes of most vegetables here, okay? So you can think of the likes of spinach, think of the likes of raspberries, for example. So watermelon, strawberries, lettuce, lots of vegetables, very low in energy density because they don't have a huge amount of calories per 100 grams. Now we can think of lots of food with high energy density. So foods with high energy density are not necessarily unhealthy foods. They're just foods with a high caloric value per 100 grams. But there are a lot of hyperpalatable foods which fall into this category. So we have the likes of oil, which is pretty much pure fat. So if you're talking about getting in 100 grams of that, you're probably having about 900 calories. And then we have the likes of our pizza, our burgers, chips. These are all going to be foods which have a high energy density. Now foods with a low energy density typically have a very high water content and a high fiber content compared to high energy density foods on average. So because of this, these foods typically, they will take up a greater volume. So if you think of the likes of what 100 grams of spinach would look like, that is a huge portion of food relative to what 100 grams of, say, a brownie would look like. But the actual calorie density of one is far higher. And to get the level of calories you get from 100 grams of a brownie from spinach, you would genuinely have to eat kilograms. So these low energy density foods, we want to have a ton of these within the diet because one, they're going to help us feel fuller for longer. They're going to take up greater space on our plate, greater space in our stomach. They're going to take a long time for us to eat. And as well, they have a ton of nutrients in them, which are going to be very beneficial as our food goes down. Things that are probably going to go down as well during a diet is your micronutrient status. So a lot of these foods I'm talking about here, they have a high micronutrient value. So you could probably stave off any kind of deficiency as your calories get lower. If you want to think about this in practical terms, if you want to imagine a scenario where you are told, you can eat as much raspberries as you want, and then the other scenario where you are told to eat as much chocolate cake as you want, you are probably going to eat more calories from the chocolate cake on average before you feel full and stop compared to likes of your raspberries, because the actual calorie per gram is so different between the two scenarios. And that is what is really important here. The actual food volume is so important for how you are going to feel full, and this is us leveraging that satiety system. So when we start to eat a lot of food and our stomach starts to fill up, there are stretch receptors that will start to send important satiety hormones up to our brain to tell us that we're starting to feel full and tell us that it's time to stop the meal. So it's probably a good idea to have a lot of the foods within our diet when we are going through a dieting phase to make up of these low energy density foods. And typically, again, they are going to be comprised of the likes of our fruit and vegetables, whole grain carbs, lean protein sources. So they are generally going to be what is going to help us keep full through a diet. And the kind of theme here is they're all relatively minimally processed foods. And even if you were to decide to say, you know what, I don't necessarily want to track my macros, you probably could if you followed a diet which is mainly comprised of single ingredient whole foods. And there has been research that has looked at this. So there was a very classic study done by Kevin Hall a few years ago where they essentially had a group of 20 people brought to the NIH Clinical Institute, where they essentially split them up into two groups. So they ran this study over 2 weeks, around 20 people, and they wanted to see, if we give these two different diets to these people, how much calories on average do they consume between one and the other. So they had one group follow an ultra processed diet. So that was things like, cookies, candy, donuts, croissant, all that kind of stuff. And the other one was minimally processed. So pretty much single ingredient whole foods. And they were given a buffet style scenario, and they were essentially just monitored over 2 weeks, and they were just told to eat as much as they wanted. And on average, the group that were eating the ultra processed foods, they actually consumed 500 calories more on average. And these groups were not tracking macros or anything like that. They were just told to eat freely. So the group that was told to eat more of the ultra processed foods, they ended up consuming more calories, and many of these calories are coming from the likes of carbs and fats, because a lot of those ultra processed foods were made up of that, but they weren't having a huge amount of additional calories coming from protein. Whereas in the other group, they actually seen a reduction in weight because there were less calories over time, and they were actually reporting higher degrees of fullness as well throughout the study. So another really important thing that we can leverage during a diet is the texture of food. If you've ever noticed, foods that are actually harder to eat, or they have a harder texture, they require you to chew more, okay? Okay, and what does that do? Well, it slows down your eating speed, and these slower eating speeds can allow your gut to essentially get those satiety signals that I mentioned earlier to relay back up to your brain that, like, you know, you're starting to get full. And as well, if you think about it, foods that are generally soft, again, you can think of donuts here. They are soft, they're easy to eat, they don't require a huge amount to chews, and therefore they're actually easier to eat a lot more calories in the same amount of time as it may take you to eat a bowl of broccoli, for example. And there have been studies to actually look at this phenomena too. And generally the foods that have a harder texture and that are minimally processed will result in eating fewer calories at a given meal. And I suppose within this category of the soft foods, you could also think of the likes of liquid calories. Liquid calories in general do not offer a satiety benefit like the likes if you ate food in a solid form. So an example here would be drinking a smoothie versus eating the fruit. If you think about a smoothie which you have maybe 200 grams of fruit in, you could drink that pretty quickly. But if you were to sit down and eat the 200 grams of fruit, you'd have to go through this process of eating your food, chewing it, and because of this, it's taking longer to eat it. And this again is giving these satiety signals within your gut to relay back up to the brain. Now, interestingly, when we look at foods like soup does not actually have this same characteristic, even though it is liquid calories. And one of the reasons why that may be is because of the way you eat soup. So typically people are going to be eating soup with a spoon. So eating soup with a spoon, again, it's going to slow down that eating process. So again, it's helping you to leverage the satiety hormones within your stomach, feeding them back up to the brain. Now, what about protein? Protein is often considered to be the macronutrient that offers the greatest satiety benefit. And this can be true to an extent, but not always the case. So there was a classic study done back in the 90s called Satiety Index of Common Household Foods. And protein sources, they were high, but they certainly were not the highest. So the highest foods within the study were actually potatoes. We had the likes of porridge, we also had the likes of oranges, which actually outscored the likes of red meat. White fish was relatively high. However, these higher carbohydrate foods were slightly more satiating. Now again, if we think back to earlier, a lot of these foods do contain fiber, they contain water, which are going to, again, increase the satiety value of that meal. Now, protein can, in certain situations, be satiating. And it really depends on the type of protein as well that you're going to be taking in. There's a difference between having a very palatable, super sweet protein shake, which is going to be drank in a few seconds, versus having the equivalent calories in a bland chicken breast. Now, I don't know about you, but I could probably drink a lot of protein shakes because they're so sweet all day. But if you gave me the equivalent amount of chicken fillets, I probably wouldn't be able to get those down. So the diet is here. However, we can look at the likes of protein bars, for example, which are extremely common, and they can offer some benefit in regards to getting a protein hit in throughout the day if you are short on time or you need the convenience, but they probably won't do a huge amount for your satiety. And in the short term, picking that bar over, say, a Mars bar, it may help curb your hunger in that instance, because a Mars bar, again, is hyper palatable. It triggers the food reward system, so you're probably going to eat more food after relative to the protein bar. But over time, the satiety benefit you get from that protein bar will start to lessen over time. And as calories go down, again, we have to consider energy density. The energy density of a protein bar is pretty poor. Per 100 grams, the energy density that you're getting in for a protein bar is a pretty poor trade-off. And when we think about the food volume of a protein bar too, again, it's just not really a great option, especially if you're going to be very hungry. And I can tell you from my own personal experience, over the years I've gone through multiple diets. The diets where I've opted for more lower energy density foods in my diet and started to displace the higher energy density foods out of them, my experience has been so much easier. Last year I did a 36-week bodybuilding prep, and I'll put my diet template up on the screen for you to see, which I was following in my final few weeks. And honestly, like, the hunger, like, while it was there, I generally felt relatively fine. I didn't have a huge amount of cravings. I didn't have a huge amount of hunger pangs throughout the day, even though my calories were the lowest they had been in years. And I attribute this mainly to picking mainly single ingredient foods, having meals throughout the day which were slightly boring in essence, which didn't drive a huge amount of food reward. And as well, the weight of the food relative to the amount of calories that I was taking in was astronomical. Some meals I was taking in maybe 400 calories of that actual meal itself and having 600, 700 grams of food. So this video has been relatively long, but I wanted to make it long because this is a very, very important concept to understand when it does come to mastering your diet and making your life easier during the fat loss phase. The foods you choose do matter, so ensure that you are picking the right ones. Look at the packet of any food that you're using throughout your fat loss phase and look at the energy density of it. How many calories in it relative to how many grams are in it. Pay attention to food volume. You don't want to have a very sparse and empty looking plate. You want to try fill that up with low energy density foods. You want to fill that up with the likes of your vegetables. You want to include fruit within some meals as well to ensure that you are leveraging this energy density, because the smaller your meals look, you are going to start getting into your head that you are eating less. And as a result, you're probably going to start to feel hungrier more often. So if you could ensure that you leverage these low energy density foods, fill up your plate, spread your meals evenly across the day, ensuring that a lot of your food is coming from single ingredient whole foods, your fruits, your vegetables, your lean proteins, your whole grain carb sources, your healthy fat sources, the likes of your nuts, your seeds, your dark chocolate, your polyunsaturated fats, the likes of your oils, canola oil, sunflower oil. A lot of these things, if you incorporate them within the diet, they're going to make the experience of dieting so much more seamless. And of course, you can still have some foods within the diet just because they taste nice. But understand, as your calories go down, they should make up a smaller percentage of your diet to ensure that you are staying adherent to the process. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this. I hope this really helped. This is a concept when I found out about it and I started using it for myself, it helped accelerate my results so much. So thank you very much for watching. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.